Welcome to another edition of Horse Center, everyone. I am Brian Zipsey, and as always, I have the fantastic pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm great, Brian. It's good to be at Horse Center with you, and I say let's get to the show straight away.
To the show straight away here from the Horse Center headquarters, Matt. We're going to do something a little bit different, but it's kind of an end-of-the-year show, and we know how much our viewers like the end of the year shows. This one's going to be about the international stars, and I think this year, more than any other year, Matt, that I can remember, American race fans are into what's happening outside of the U.S. scene in racing, and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Global racing, make racing a smaller world. We got to start. If we're going to do an international highlight show from 2017, Matt, I think there's nowhere else to start from the Wonder Mare Down Under. Of course, I'm talking about the 6-year-old daughter of Street Cry, Winx. Matt, she's on quite a roll.
She sure is. I think she's at 22 races in a row in an amazing career where she has 26 total wins, 24 of them coming in stakes races, and 18 of them coming in Group 1 races. $15 million earned. An amazing career, and she's coming back again.
That's right, Matt. Winx is just doing things that we've never seen done before. Down in Australia, the biggest race that's not 2 miles or more, of course, is the Cox Plate. The Cox Plate is the biggest race where races we're familiar with, at least. The Melbourne Cup down there, of course, is a real marathon race. But of the weight for age races, the races that we run over here, the Cox Plate at about 10 furlongs is the biggest Australian offers. And Winx has won 3 in a row. She became only the second horse ever to turn the feet. This year wasn't as easy as last year was. But once again, Winx showed her class. Matt, at one point in her career, she was 4 of 10. Now, as you mentioned, 26 wins out of 32 career races. So what does that mean? Yes, 22 straight wins for the daughter Street Cry. She's trained by Chris Waller. And of course, the good news, at least on an international basis, is he's talked about bringing her places. I think the first place would be Royal Ascot in the summer of 2018. I even asked him, what about America? And he said, not out of the question. You never know. So we'll see, Matt, but it's exciting to see. I'm excited to see what Winx can do outside of her native land.
Yeah, and Winx was preceded by another great mare in Australia, Black Caviar, with her big winning streak. And they had the same questions about Black Caviar running outside Australia, and she was able to go to Royal Ascot and come up with a win there also. It's exciting. And I can't imagine the excitement there would be if Winx would come over to America.
Yeah, that's what I told the trainer, again, Chris Waller, when I talked to him last year. America would go crazy for Winx, and I certainly believe that. Matt, she's 6 years old. I guess she's 5.5 by American or Northern Hemisphere standing, but she's going to be back. We're certainly looking forward to Royal Ascot next year. But comparing her to Black Caviar, I don't think is doing Winx complete justice. Winx, of course, has run distances far superior than to what Black Caviar did. Black Caviar really was a sprinter, and she was a fantastic sprinter. She came over for one race in Europe and won, despite probably not being 100%. But Winx can win those sprints, and what we saw this year was Winx really needing to kick it in late with an amazing turn of foot, and then stretch out. As we said, the Cox Plate is about 10 furlongs, and she's certainly proven the best horse in Australia for the last 3 years. Matt, some of those numbers we already talked about, 22 straight. In 2017 alone, she's 9 for 9. That's 2 different racing seasons for Australia. So for the spring season in Australia, she went 5 for 5, culminating with that historic third win in the Cox Plate. She's been Horse of the Year the last 2 years. Now, Horse of the Year won't be decided again until the middle of next year for us, but I'm sure she's going to be the third. She'll win a third straight Horse of the Year title in Australia. And a little tidbit here that I didn't know beforehand is when she was inducted into the Australian Hall of Fame, Racing Hall of Fame, she became only the third horse to be inducted into Australia's Racing Hall of Fame while still racing. So, again, a remarkable career. And the good news is that it continues on.
It sure is, Brian.
All right, Matt. So Winx, best turf horse in the world. She's rated as the best turf horse in the world. She's a mare, as we've alluded to. If she's not the best turf horse in the world, it's probably another female that is. We're going to jump way down from a 6-year-old to a 3-year-old for our next horse, Matt. Enable. Now, a lot of these horses we're going to talk about today, folks, are horses that have some American interest. Now, Enable has never run in America. She was bred in England. She's trained by John Gosden, and John Gosden is a trainer who has come over to win American races numerous times. So we're hopeful that Enable might be a horse that he brings to America next year. So I'm already talking about next year with Enable, Matt. We know she's coming back at 4, but boy, was she good at 3.
She sure was, Brian. An amazing record. 8 starts, 7 wins. She's won 6 races in a row now that she's gotten rolling. 5 of those, the last 5 of those have been grade 1s, and they haven't just been any grade 1s, Brian. They have been the biggest grade 1s in Europe, and the biggest of them all when she became the first British filly ever to win the Arc in France.
Yeah, 3-year-old filly beating the boys, Matt. Let's look at that career a little bit. She raced once last year, as Matt mentioned, 7 out of 8. John Gosden's not one to typically have his horses at full tilt for the first race of the year, and Enable was beaten in her second start of her life, which was the first start of 2017. Since then, she's been simply unbeatable with 6 straight. As Matt mentioned, the last 5 have been Group 1. And what's interesting, Matt, here, it just grew in stature because she was beating the best 3-year-old fillies, winning a stakes race, and then winning both the Epsom and the Irish Oaks, which, of course, are the 2 biggest 3-year-old filly races in Europe. She did it easily. And then what did she do for an encore? You know, only about 5 races into her career, she started racing against older horses. There was the King George Queen Elizabeth, which is a huge race for older horses in Europe, men and women, males and females. She beat them. The Yorkshire Oaks, she beat older females quite easily. And then, as you mentioned, her first race in France, the Arc, and it was no contest.
It really wasn't. And it was a remarkable performance. She has Frankie Dettori, the legendary Frankie Dettori, up as her rider. And he had her just covered up, sitting in a perfect position, pretty close to the pace. But when he asked her to run, she just, what a turn of foot to turn back the kind of field that is assembled every year in the Arc. It got Frankie Dettori his 5th career win in the Arc. She's a special, special horse. Another one that I think American fans would get very, very excited to see run maybe in the Breeders' Cup.
The Breeders' Cup will be at Churchill Downs next year, so maybe even more reason for Europeans to give it a try where they won't find the hottest weather of, say, Santa Anita or Gulfstream Park or something. Yeah, Matt, she's out of the first crop by Nathaniel. Nathaniel was a Group 1 winner out of Galileo. The breeding is there. Enable, what we want to see next year maybe is a similar path that ends with the Breeders' Cup turf eventually. But what about Ascot? Maybe a little earlier in her season, if we can get a nice 10-furlong race, say the Prince of Wales's race, where Enable and Winx hook up at 10 furlongs at Ascot. That would be interesting.
That would be more than interesting, Brian. That could be one of the great matchups in a long time on the racetrack.
Both female, both coming back next year. We couldn't start our international highlight show without starting with Winx and Enable. Matt, let's get a little bit even more current here because there were some big doings on an international scale just this past week. We have to talk about Highland Reel, Matt, because Highland Reel has been a group stakes winner now for 4 consecutive seasons. The son of Galileo, arguably the best turf sire we've seen in the last 10 years, is retiring now. But what a way to go out.
Certainly. You got to love Highland Reel, kind of horse that comes every single race to compete and is always in it at the finish. And what a way to finish a career that has had 27 races and 10 big wins all over the globe, 2 separate trips to the U.S. to win, once in Chicago and once in the Breeders' Cup. And then, as you said, in Asia and Hong Kong, Highland Reel has run in the Arc and finished second there. What a terrific training job, of course, from Aidan O'Brien, the combo of Aidan O'Brien and Ryan Moore.
Yeah, and just getting back to what happened on Sunday, Matt, that Breeders' Cup Turf winner with the big white blaze came right up to him. I don't know about you at the 8th ball, and it looked like he was going to go right by Highland Reel, and then Highland Reel, of course, showed what we had learned over the last 4 years. Highland Reel is just a determined horse. You know, he does certainly like a firmer turf course than a softer one. He would often get washed out before races and be lathered up before races. I saw him win in Chicago, Grade 1 Secretariat 3 years ago. We saw him win the Breeders' Cup Turf at Santa Anita. This year's Breeders' Cup Turf, I don't think he gets enough credit. It wasn't, he kind of held off the pace a little bit more, and it looked like he wasn't running his best. And then what do you know? He comes running down the stretch pretty darn well, and he's beaten less than a length from winning his 2nd straight Breeders' Cup Turf. Matt, he's run in big races in England, the United States, Hong Kong, France, Ireland, Dubai, and of course Australia, where he ran a very good race a few years ago in the Cox Plate as a 3-year-old, beaten by Winx.
Yep, he's got quite the frequent flyer mile account, and of course all of that is added up to $10 million. So you gotta love Highland Reel, son of Galileo. Gotta figure he's going to be popular in the breeding shed.
Absolutely, Matt. Yeah, 10 wins, 6 seconds, 3 thirds out of 27 races. But more importantly, and I think we love him for it, Matt, not only was he just a really talented, really game horse, he ran everywhere. He ran in the biggest races everywhere. And he'll be missed because what he did in America alone, just on his American races, Matt, you'd have to call him one of the best turf horses we've had the last few years. Highland Reel earned his retirement many times over, but what a way to go out with that nice win. Determined, game, classy win in the Hong Kong Vase. Matt, the other horse we're going to talk about from this past week is far different than Highland Reel. I don't mean to put Toast of New York down in any way, because Toast of New York is an interesting horse. But while he is 1 year older than Highland Reel, he's had only a third of the races that Highland Reel has. Of course, Toast of New York has only run 9 times, and he had injuries early in his 4-year-old year that prevented him from coming back to the races. He went to stud. Amazingly, though, Matt, after more than 3 years away from his last race, he came back and he looked good, winning a race, the 4th race at Lingfield on Wednesday, you know, a minor stakes race with not Group 1 horses, Group 3 horses even. But I think it was quite a feat for him to come back and win like that.
Yeah, without question. And let's remember, let's go back to his 3-year-old season where he won the UAE Derby in Dubai, and then later on in the year came to the United States, ran in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and just narrowly finished second behind Bayern in that controversial Breeders' Cup where Bayern wiped out a good amount of the runners coming out of the gate. And as you said, Brian, after that, he had some injuries, and he had some tendon injuries, which are ones that take a very, very long time to heal. You can't come right back in 3 months or 4 months with those kind of things. He went to stud. He doesn't really have a fashionable pedigree, so he wasn't that popular there. Things didn't work out well, and the tendons healed up, and they're giving him another try.
Yeah, interestingly, Matt, he's been in training since March, so we need to give kudos to trainer Jamie Osborne, former rider turned trainer over there in Europe, and what a training job by Osborne to get this horse ready after literally over 1,000 days between races. That's more than DeHaas, folks. That's something else. And so confident are the connections, and Osborne. Now he's with Al Shakab Racing, by the way, after he was retired the first time, and of course we're familiar with them and the good horses that they campaigned. But what a training job for Osborne to have him ready. He looks like a bigger, thicker horse. He's a very handsome horse. Son of the Way You Are, who had some good breeding, but we don't know a lot about the Way You Are as a sire, certainly. And as Matt alluded, where he wasn't getting enough mares. So why not bring him back? They're already talking about the Pegasus World Cup as a possibility. That seems a little bit mind-blowing to me, considering what kind of racing he's had. But as I mentioned, DeHaas, you never know. And obviously this horse is extremely talented. They're talking Dubai World Cup as another possibility. And that's the race he was really pointed for early in his 4-year-old season before the injuries prevented it. 9 races now, 4 wins, 3 seconds. Toast in New York, he's run on every surface. His wins have really come on synthetic surfaces, but it would be hard to argue that his best races of all weren't on dirt. The other one being the Pacific Classic, where he ran a good second place. And then, of course, that Breeders' Cup Classic. I didn't want you to mention it, Matt, because it still hurts me that Bayern was left up when he didn't deserve to be. Toast of New York was beaten just a nose in the race anyway, but certainly I think both you and I felt like Bayern should have come down. California Chrome not far behind, but Toast of New York ran an absolutely huge race. I thought he was going to be put up in the Breeders' Cup Classic of 2014. Now he's back. Like I said, he can run on any surface, and it'll be very interesting to see where he goes next. Matt, dirt races, there's some rich dirt races coming. So will we see Toast in New York and Florida?
I don't know. If we don't see him in Florida, then like you said, Brian, I think we're likely to see him some other place later on down the road. It seems like his trainer, as you said, is being very careful with him being back in training since March. He's being really careful with the horse, with the injuries in the past, and I think he'll continue to be that way, keeping the best in mind for Toast of New York.
I'm going to agree with you, Matt. I think Toast of New York is probably not likely. I know they're talking about the Pegasus, but I don't think he'll be in Florida in January. I do think he'll be at Meydan in Dubai in March. And Matt, he could be one of the favorites off of one race in about 3.5 years in the Dubai World Cup. Classy horse. Good to have him back. Let's get back to 3-year-olds. 3-year-olds trained by John Gosden. Matt, Enable beat a top-notch field of older horses in the ARC. A lot of good ones that were in there. One that wasn't was Cracksman. And Cracksman is a first-crop sire, Frankel. We all know how good Frankel was. So Cracksman is out of the first crop of Frankel. Much like Enable, brought around a little slowly. But I will say this, in his 3rd lifetime race, think about this in American terms. In his 3rd lifetime race, he was favored in the biggest 3-year-old race in Europe, if not the world, on grass for sure, the Epsom Derby. Only his 3rd race with a record of 1 win out of 2 races. So obviously, Cracksman's been well-liked from the beginning.
Yes, certainly has, and has already put together a very impressive record. As you said, 7 starts, but 5 wins already. 1 second, 1/3, almost $2 million in earnings, and already, like as you alluded to, he's making Frankel's first crop of runners already super impressive.
Absolutely, Matt. And I mentioned being favored in the Epsom Derby, only his 3rd race. I guess he had 2 wins because he did get up and just win that trial race beforehand. So he went in there with 2 wins. But then he was beaten in 2 consecutive races. beaten narrowly in big fields in the Epsom Derby, and then in the Irish Derby, he just missed the biggest 3-year-old races in Europe. Those were his third and fourth lifetime races. Since then, he's been unbeatable, winning the Great Voltigeur in England before going to France, where he really did well to win the Prix Niel impressively. That's a Group 1 race over there, and often a prep for the Arc. A lot of people thought he would be one of the horses to beat in the Arc. John Gosden thought he's a lightly raced and a horse who's still maturing, still developing. Plus, he had a Naval already in the Arc, so no wonder that he skipped the Arc, but then went to the Champion Stakes. And Matt, there are people I know that think Cracksman is in fact better than a Naval off of that performance he ran in the Champion Stakes, which has become the biggest race, I think, in England for older horses.
Yeah, and you know, in England, it's not often that horses win races by big margins like Cracksman did in that Champion Stakes, where you can see watching this replay, folks, that he just opened up and ended winning by 7 lengths. As Brian said, against older horses, quite a performance. So there's a lot to look forward to. If we don't have a Winx Enable matchup, I think it's probably pretty likely at some point next year we'll have an Enable Cracksman matchup, which will be a stellar matchup.
Yeah, Gosden certainly has 2 huge bullets in the holster in Enable and Cracksman. And as I alluded to, Gosden really feels about Cracksman at least, and maybe to some extent Enable. The best is yet to come. Cracksman's a horse that he thinks will just be better in 2018. And seeing how he finished out 2017, I think we got a good glimpse of what Gosden is talking about. Gosden, obviously one of the best trainers in the world, and Cracksman, a son of Frankel, perhaps the best European horse in the last quarter century. Cracksman looks like he could be any kind, still lightly raced. So very exciting. Again, race fans, best of all, he will be back next year. I would suspect this year we get one of them to come over for the Breeders' Cup Turf, Matt, either Enable or Cracksman. Speaking of coming over, Lady Aurelia is a daughter of Scott Daddy, a Kentucky bred. She's an American, but Matt, it's hard to call her just an American, considering that she is literally the most accomplished American trained horse in Europe of our lifetime, I would say.
Yeah, 8 career starts for Lady Aurelia. 5 of them have come in Europe, and they have included over 2 different years, her 2-year-old and her 3-year-old year, 2 Grade 1 victories and a Grade 2 victory and a third. So a record in Europe of 5 starts, 3 wins, 1 second, and 1 third. Quite an achievement for an American. And like you mentioned earlier in the show, it's horses like Lady Aurelia and trainer like Wesley Ward, who is invested in running horses over in Europe, particularly at Ascot, that is building interest from Americans in European racing. Lady Aurelia is owned by Stone Street in partnership with George Bolton, same partnership that owned a favorite of mine years ago, my Miss Aurelia.
Yeah, Lady Aurelia is a very interesting horse. Of course, the trainer Wesley Ward has been doing this now for years, especially that Royal Ascot meeting in June, bringing over some good horse flesh and winning races over there. But like we both said, Lady Aurelia has done it like no other horse has done it. Scott Daddy, of course, we lost him a few years ago, one of our best sires. So it's nice to see horses like Lady Aurelia succeeding. Matt, all 5 of those races were big races she ran at Europe, 3 last year, 2 this year. Even the 2 she lost narrowly this year, and the 3rd last year where she got a little tired late. She's a sprinter, but still, after a disappointing effort in the Breeders' Cup turf sprint, you'd have to say she's proven to be one of the best turf sprinters in the world. And to see what she's done over there, to show how well respected she is in Europe, our American was actually the champion 2-year-old filly in Europe last year. So that says a lot about Lady Aurelia and what she was been able to accomplish, not just at Ascot, not just in England, but also in France. So Lady Aurelia, if we're talking international stars of 2017, got to mention Lady Aurelia in the list. And Matt, that talking about her, a daughter of Scat Daddy, brings us to another Scat Daddy offspring. This one, a son of Scat Daddy. Mendelssohn, bred to the hilt, was only one of 4 in Europe this year on the grass, but interestingly, he was second in one of the bigger races over there. So he was really starting to show his development as a top 2-year-old in Europe before he came over and ran what I think was a huge race in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf.
Yeah, it was a huge race. It was a big field, a field of talented horses, both Americans and Europeans, and Mendelssohn showed his stuff in there. Remember, as Brian was talking about, he's well bred. He's a half brother to Beholder, the great mare Beholder, and to Into Mischief, who is becoming a really important sire. So a tremendous pedigree that brought $3 million as a yearling for this horse, and he lived up to that in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf.
Absolutely, Matt. That breeding, again, folks, Scat Daddy, one of our best sires we've lost recently, but also Leslie's Lady. Leslie's Lady, first she had Into Mischief, who was a Grade 1 winner himself. People tend to forget how good Into Mischief was on the racetrack. But yeah, he's proven to be one of our best sires now in the country for Spendthrift Farm. And then Beholder. I don't need to say much about Beholder, simply one of the best race mares we've had in the 21st century here in America. So his breeding speaks to his class, but also speaks to dirt, which is interesting because Mendelssohn's never run on dirt. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf hero, and he beat good horses, by the way, Matt. I think Untamed Domain and Catholic Boy. Obviously, it was not a weak field that he beat, and he did it convincingly. The good news is all this breeding points to dirt, and he's on the Kentucky Derby Trail, this $3 million yearling. He's proven both in England and in the United States. Aidan O'Brien, one of the more interesting international horses, and one that made this list in large part because he's on the Kentucky Derby Trail now for a powerful outfit and trainer.
Yep, and there aren't many big races around the world that Aidan O'Brien hasn't won. The Kentucky Derby is one of them, and I'm pretty sure he's going to go for it with gusto with a talented horse, Mendelssohn. I think both of us like this horse and have him pretty high on our Kentucky Derby list right now. I can't wait to see him next year when he comes over to gather up the qualifying points that he needs.
All right, Matt, there are so many international stars, of course, that we didn't mention, and we don't mean to belittle any country's top races or top horses, but these were 7 horses that we felt internationally have made huge noise in 2017, but also have special interest to American race fans. Winx, Unable, Highland Reel, Toast of New York, Cracksman, Lady Aurelia, and Mendelssohn. So an interesting group. Hopefully you enjoyed our international highlight of 2017 show. We know we had fun bringing it to you. I want to thank you, as always, for watching Horse Center on a weekly basis. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel here on Horse Racing Nation. We're brought to you by the best contest site out there, Derby Wars. Matt, can I get perhaps an international closing parting shot from you?
Sure, Brian. And I think some of the interest that you and I have in international racing is because we've both had the opportunity to go to the races over in England. And folks, if you're ever planning a trip and you're over in England or Ireland or France, take a day and go to the races over there. It's a little different than here in the States. A wonderful experience. And as always, I want to thank our producer, Brett Workman.
Thank you to Brett Workman. And I just want to add on to that point that Matt made. Maybe Matt, we should form a trip or two or more where we host a group of race fans on these trips internationally. That would be a good time.
It sure would. You know, you and I have made friends over in England at the racetrack that we keep in touch with all the time. So people should think about it.
And that's it for Horse Center. We'll be back next week. See you then.